Geoff, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I was telling you before we went live that your book, Who, really revolutionized my business, and I'm so excited to dive into this. But first, you sent me a paper napkin that I'd love you to describe to the audience, and then we can dive right into what it means.
Awesome. So the question on the paper napkin is your formula for success. Like, what is it, right? What is it? Is there one? Is there a formula for success? And it says P times W times R equals powerscore. And so this is the title of our newest book called PowerScore, where we studied 3,052 leaders and their teams to try to answer the question, is there a formula for success? And we found it, and it blew our minds. And I hope it's going to blow your mind today also.
Yeah, so let's just back down for a second and actually say, like, why did you even think, what did you conceive that there would even be a formula for success? I mean, success sort of feels like this nebulous thing, and it's individualized and it's different in circumstances. So what made you even conceive that there could be a formula?
Sure. So I've been in the success business my whole career. You know, Peter Drucker, the great management thinker and writer, he's considered the father of management. So I was his student in graduate school. He was my professor at Claremont. So you know, it was like sitting at the feet of Socrates, right? Talking with Peter Drucker about, hey, you know, what makes a leader successful, or what are derailers? And so I got a PhD in psychology with a focus on organizational behavior. And so that was 20 years ago. And, you know, over the 20 years of consulting and writing books and giving keynotes, we were very focused on hiring talented teams with our Who book. And our publisher and my co-author, Randy Street, basically were saying, like, look, you know, tips on hiring, that's really important, but that's not the whole enchilada. What if you guys did a big research study, looked at your 20 years of data to try to figure out a more holistic formula for leadership success? So that's what motivated our journey to crunch, at the time, it was 17 years worth of data to see if we could find any formula.
So 17 years worth of data, 3,052 teams, right?
Leaders with teams attached to them. And that's right. So 3,052 leaders and their teams. It's the biggest database of its kind. And yeah, so we say it's kind of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, but we say the $1 million question is, you know, what is the formula for success? Well, our $100 million answer, that's how much it would cost if you ran all these leaders and their teams through our assessment process over the last 17 years. The $100 million answer is what we came up with.
That's amazing. So $100 million answer, and you boiled it down to just three things, right? So yep. Priorities, who, and relationships.
You're going to give them the punchline already? What do you like? You're just like, no immediate, this is just immediate gratification? Punchline right off the bat.
Punchline right off the bat. You know, hey, look, it's an entrepreneur crowd. We gotta boil it down. But to me, it seems simple, but I bet it was really complicated getting to that. Like there would have been a lot of noise.
Well, there's a lot of simple answers to the question of leadership success, right? There are 102,000 management books, as you'll see with your new book launch, right? There are a lot of different cuts. You know, you have great CEOs who are like, hey, here's one person's opinion about success. Or you have the really academic types, or you have, you know, the 28 laws of this and that from, you know, like televangelists, right? You have the 50 shades. All right, maybe not 50 shades. But we were like, no, we're going to take an analytical approach. We're going to look at real people, lots of them, and look for what matters. Oh, here's another funny thing. I think you'll see, you know, there are lots of leadership books that emphasize honesty and integrity, you know, being really authentic, like that's the end all be all. Well, we found in our sample, 91% of leaders are honest. So like if 91% of leaders are honest and your readership and listenership are entrepreneurs, they want to be successful, just being honest isn't going to be a recipe for success. If 91%, it's like having having lungs or being able to breathe. So there were a lot of like conventional wisdom answers to the question, what really matters? But the empirical data proved out that these three things mattered and nothing else mattered nearly as much.
Yeah, and it's also the self-perception thing. I love you talking about honesty or integrity in that way, because so many people say, oh, it's the most important thing, honesty and integrity. And certainly error is really important. We can't live without it, but it's table stakes. There's nothing without it, right?
Totally table stakes.
And there are other people like Enron who had core values that had integrity among them.
Right.
Right.
Yep. So it's not just about integrity and honesty.
Yeah. So when you were doing the research and when you went through the 3,052 leadership teams, 17 years worth of data, so you took time out of it. There's no trend involved in this, right?
Right. So basically it was like 500 data points, per leader times every one of their jobs and teams, and we looked at, I think it was like 36 different variables. Honesty and integrity was one of them, right? We're like, oh, is that it? Oh, no, actually, successful people and unsuccessful people are about roughly the same honesty, right? So that's not going to do it. So if you were good at these three things, priorities, who, and relationships, if you're good at these three things, you are 20 times more likely to be successful than if you're not good at these three things. And no other three variables had that kind of predictive power. And ironically, they spell power. So prioritization, being able to prioritize, what are we focusing on as an entrepreneurial team? Hiring and leading, hiring and developing talent. That's the who part. And then relationships. Those three things, they're not the same thing, are they're different things. And there aren't four things and there aren't two things. It's like these three things. If you're really good at them, you are 20 times more likely to be successful than if you weren't. So it's like a monster finding in the world of success and research.
No, and I think it really is monstrous. And what really resonates with me is when we did 1,000 paper napkins around the world across a bunch of different segments of society, but all entrepreneurs, and we looked at them, it was like 1,000 voices speaking the same words around 5 simple steps. So it actually does get really simple. And but the challenge is for most of us is we don't achieve this sort of exponential level of success repeatedly. So we can't recognize these things that happen as being patterns. But what you've done is create these patterns that exist because you've done it in terms of 3,052 samples across 17 years. So it's not, the thing that I like about this work that you've done is people are going to say, hey, it doesn't apply to millennials. It doesn't apply to Gen Xers. Or did you take into account this? It takes into account all of it, right?
Yeah, every SIC code, every age, every size company, public sector, private sector. It's just it's the biggest study of its kind, right? So we're able to, include everybody and then just see if there was any trend line. We weren't sure we'd find anything. It could have just been all noise, but it was interesting, and you might find these stats interesting. Being good at prioritizing, only 24% of leaders are good at prioritizing. So that's a pretty rare skill. And it sounds really straightforward. I mean, setting goals and figuring out, whether it's customer goals or product goals, financial targets, really prioritizing what matters most seems so fundamental to success in entrepreneurship. And yet lots of entrepreneur buddies you have and that we have, they have too many priorities, right? They're kind of chasing lots of different things. So that was our most common finding of, if you're not good at prioritizing, it's usually 90% of the time it's because you have too many of them as opposed to too few. So the challenge for your entrepreneurs listening to this, focus on the 2 or 3 priorities that really matter most. Get your team around them, focus, set goals. That's very rare and difficult, but important.
Yeah, and it's also putting them in the right order, right? Also making sure that if you are going to focus on less, actually setting them up in an order that makes a lot of sense, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I'm totally aligned with this. We often say in our companies, and one of the things that came out of Paper Napkin Wisdom was, what is that one thing that makes everything either unnecessary, irrelevant, or already done? Like focus on that one big priority, that lead domino. Yep.
Really hard to do, important to do, and a clear predictor of success in this big study.
So when you talk about this, you said 24% of leaders only 24% of leaders were good at prioritizing.
Correct.
And 90% of them had too many. What kind of multiple did people see if they got this part right? Just this part.
Yeah. So we made the formula multiplicative to your point here, because if you're bad at any one of these 3 things in our observation, it kind of cancels out the other goods. So for example, like if you're just lousy at prioritizing, but you have good people and you're good at building relationships, you're not going to be successful. Or, if, hey, you're great at making priorities, but you have like the wrong team, right? You've seen what happens if, you could be good as an entrepreneur, have a crystal clear idea of what your priorities are, but if you hire the wrong team, you're not going to get the results you want. You could have priorities and the right people, but just be really bad at building relationships. Your team unravels, your customers don't get service. So it was multiplicative, meaning you actually have to be really good at each in order to get a high power score. It's kind of like running a triathlon. So triathlon, what is it? Swimming, biking, and running. You can't suck at any one of those things if you hope to win a triathlon.
Yeah, and you can't just not do it, right?
Yeah.
You can't just get into the water and say, I'm just not going to do the swimming part.
Too cold. Yeah, no, you got to do all three and do them well in order to win in business.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so is there a reason why you put them in this order, like PWR?
Yeah, there are two reasons. So let's see here. I'm trying to not bore your readers with too much like history lesson. We actually had them named something different when we discovered it. We called them the 3 A's originally, which was priorities we called that analyzing, like the skill of analyzing. Then we called the second one allocating, like allocating people and dollars. And then the third one we called aligning. And it's the same variables, but we named them these 3 A's. The focus groups and the entrepreneurs, the people we were like pitching this to, it seemed a little too academic. So that's why we changed it from the process of like analyzing, allocating, and aligning to the outcome of having the right priorities, having the right who, having the right relationships. And that really resonated. It was easier for folks to comprehend and then use right away. So, and then it spelled power. It just like jumped off the page. We're like, whoa, it spells PWR, spells power. So the order of it is literally just because the darn thing spells power. But I like the order, Govin, because I think it starts with prioritizing, what are you trying to do with your new business? Like what, it's the what, right? Like starting with the what and maybe the why is a good place to really start. What are we trying to get done? Well, guess what? Depending on what you're trying to get done, that's going to affect who you need, right? So that's step 2, like get the right who in there. And then step 3 is around building relationships. You wouldn't build relationships before you prioritized or before you hired the people, right? So that kind of fit into the third slot nicely.
Yeah. So think about this now. So when you discovered this, when you put together this formula, how did it change the way you actually even deployed PowerScore in the world? Like, did you prioritize, then put the right who, and then build the right relationships? Is that the way you did it? Can you talk through how that happened?
Do you know what made the most impact with our clients? So we have GhSMART. It's a 70-person firm. I started it in my grad school dorm room 20 years ago, and we just run around all day long, helping leaders hire and develop talented teams that run at full power. Well, before we had this simple framework, I'd say our trusted advising, it would cover a wider range of topics. Today, we're pretty targeted and pretty tight. If we're sitting with you, it's like, hey, is this a P problem? Is this a priority problem we're trying to solve? Or is this an R problem? And it's so cool watching clients go, oh yeah, actually the priorities are pretty clear. It's really just Fred and Sally aren't getting along. Well, let's focus, let's solve the right problem here. So it really helps beg the question, what problem are we trying to solve? Is it one of priorities of who or relationships? So for that reason, it's become tighter and simpler in the trusted advising work. And frankly, when we do these workshops or conferences, it's fun watching people calculate their power score. So it's really simple to do. All you do is rate your team. The whole team does it. Do we have the right priorities? 10 is yes, 1 is no. On who? Do we have the right people who are on the team? A 10 means you have all A players. A 1 means you have like no A players. An R, do we have the right relationships? A 10 means, hey, our relationships are rocking on all 12 cylinders. Or a 1 is like, no, it's like chaos around here. Everybody's uncoordinated. And people immediately, we've done this for government organizations. We've done this for people who work in small and huge companies. They instantly can assign a rating to these 3 things. Then you multiply the numbers together, you get your power score. And it's cool that there's always a range in the room. And the people who have really high power scores will say what it's like running at full power and how they got there. People who are struggling, will share horror stories of what it's like running at low power. But it's just like a super simple shorthand for assessing your team and your likelihood of being successful.
Yeah, and what's really neat about the way that you're even talking about PowerScore is that you're living the PowerScore in the way you're talking about it, right? I mean, you even speak about it from the basis of understanding the score, having the people in the room that appreciate that way of that measurement, and you vetted that by taking the three A's out there first, right? The
Yep.
three A's were the first attempt. That didn't work in your who.
That's right.
So you went back to the priority, fixed the score so you could articulate it in a better way, and then moved it out.
That's right.
That's really fascinating.
It's like addictive a little too.
Yeah.
And it's fun because this simple framework, you can use it for your team. Hey, do we have the right priorities, who, and relationships? You could use it for your whole organization, same questions. You can even use it individually as an individual leader. Hey, looking at my own, like it's December now, we're looking at planning for next year, right? What are my personal priorities as entrepreneur? Personally, who do I personally have around me to get this stuff done? How are my top 10 or 20 relationships? So it's a super, I don't know, I guess like versatile, simple framework you could do at the individual level, at the team level, or at the whole organization level.
Oh, that's great. So in PowerScore, did you also analyze? I mean, obviously you've got a book on who. There's a great volume of data and knowledge and thought that went into the who process. And for anybody listening who doesn't have this book, if you're an entrepreneur or a leader of people and you don't have who, you just stop what you're doing, put this on pause, get who, and then come back.
Thank you.
It's that revolutionary. This book changed my entrepreneurial life. But so you've got a whole book on who.
Yep.
Does PowerScore help fill out a little bit of how to do the P and how to do the R?
Yeah, it does. One of our goals was making the book small enough that you could read it like on a 2 or 3 hour plane ride. So I don't want to say it just scratches the surface, but it basically gives you some stats, some stories, some very clear, actionable takeaways on how to improve each, the P, the W, and the R. You're right, though. The Who book, gives a lot more on the Who part than on P and R. So who knows? Maybe we should write a book called P and a book called R to like kind of fill it all out. But we interviewed, in addition to all the in-depth assessments that we did, we interviewed. I think it was about 70 really successful leaders. We only used a small number of their very best stories, their very best advice, in the different categories of PW and R. I think what I was hoping people would be able to get out of just reading the book is to be able to have a PowerScore conversation with their team, and you can totally do that. It's pretty straightforward. And in fact, it almost requires no explanation. If I just tell you, hey, of the variables that matter most are these three, evaluate your team on these three things, then have a discussion about, hey guys, what can we do to improve our P score? What can we do to improve the W? What can we do to improve the R? It really zeroes in on the actions you need to take in the places in order to move the needle.
And so the way you're describing it, so I think we talked a little bit of priorities around picking that one thing. People have too many. Mm-hmm. Who, there's the whole book on that, and it's difficult to bring it down to just a short conversation. But really, could you just summarize for people who are unfamiliar with what the who process is?
So there are 4 steps in who, in hiring and good hiring, that if you don't follow any of the 4 steps, you will hire at about a 50% failure rate. That's the average manager across the world regrets the hiring decision they make if you check in with them a year later. Hey, did you regret hiring this person or not? They make a mistake half the time not following our approach. If you follow the 4 steps, you can achieve a 90% hiring success rate. And the 4 steps, I'll just tell you what they are. First step is called scorecard, which is how to articulate what A performance means. What does it mean? What are the results that you expect a person to deliver? The second step,
before we go past, A performance means, for people listening, what an A player would do versus Correct. A B player. So if you're going to grade them, this is an A player, this is a B player, this is a C player. Obviously, the A player is what you want.
You bet. You want the A player, and if you identify what are the numbers or the results that an A player in this role, A player salesperson, an A player digital marketing lead gen person, what would an A player deliver in the way of results? That's your scorecard for that role. The second step is to then source talent. And sourcing talent, we found the best 2 ways to do it are through your existing employees. offering a referral bounty, $1,000, $3,000 if they've sourced talent, or just working your own network, whether electronically or in person. So that's sourcing talent. The third step's called select. And there are lots of really bad interviews out there in the world, like horrible ones that back from my grad school days, I read 50 years worth of research on how to interview poorly and how to interview well. Don't ask hypothetical questions. Don't ask candidates hypothetical questions because you end up getting hypothetical answers. That's something half a century of research in industrial psychology tells you, like, don't ask hypothetical questions. Yeah, a lot of people in interviews are saying, hey, how would you resolve a conflict with a teammate? Or how would you do this? How would you do that? So don't ask hypothetical questions in your interviews. There are a bunch of other tips we have, but that's one of them. And then the fourth and final step is called sell, which is like, hey, you're not done yet. Just because you interviewed someone, you decided who you want to hire, how to sell the person. And there are 5 things that matter in selling somebody, make them work for you. Fit, family, freedom, fortune, and fun are the 5 reasons people take a job. So we just say, hey, use that as a checklist when you're trying to sell people on joining your company. So those are that's like the cliff notes on the Who book.
Yeah, and just in terms of the scorecard for I think for people who are not familiar with the Who process is the hardest part because you're defining what great looks like.
Yes.
So many times we want people to come into our company to solve a problem, fix a thing, or do something that we don't understand, but we give them no parameters because we don't know what great looks like. Yep. So it's on the leader to define great in that role.
That's right. It's on the leader, and a lot of entrepreneurs will tell me, like, hey, I'm hiring my first CFO or something, but I don't know what great looks like. I say, like, well, you got to figure out what great looks like. Talk to people, compare scorecards, interview some different folks, start to get a point of view on what great looks like for this compensation level, for your size company, for the kinds of things you need this person to deliver on. So yeah, I agree with you. I think creating a great scorecard is hard and kind of like the essential first step to good hiring.
And the way that you've got this framed, if you don't have your priorities figured out, you probably can't figure out what great is because you have no idea what's going to move you towards that goal.
You bet.
Right.
That's right. And that the scorecard is a useful tool to improve priorities in your team. Let's actually write down, what are our team's priorities, and then how does that cascade into everybody's jobs? That's essentially the internal use of a scorecard. Yeah, no,
scorecards are great. And so one of the things that we do, and you said it really quickly, is that in the entrepreneurs organization groups that I'm a part of, we actually share scorecards amongst each other so that we can actually learn what each other are doing around what great looks like and how do you define it and how do you measure it and how do you talk about these different roles that are maybe new to us as our companies grow. So there are mastermind groups all over the world where you can share this kind of information, and you need to be part of one of these things.
That's right. It's a great idea.
Which is a great segue to relationships. So what do you mean by relationships, and what is that in the context of the PowerScore?
Yeah, I'll tell you what we don't mean, which is just getting along. So there are tons and tons of books on building professional relationships, and a lot of it's on getting along. And we think of relationships a little differently. We think of relationships as getting results. So in our world, in the PowerScore context, we ask leaders questions like, are the right people talking at the right time, right? Like huddle style. And what are you talking about? Are there metrics? Are there discussions that are problem solving in nature? Are you guys constantly focusing on goals and results, goals and results, goals and results? Or meetings meaningless? Or are the right people not talking at the right cadences? We talk about communication cadences a lot. What are the cadences of communication? Who's in the room? What numbers and actual results are you going over? So basically a great R score in relationships would be when the right people are talking at the right time and they're focusing on achieving results. That's basically the net of it.
And the beautiful thing about, I think, the PowerScore, and even the way you described it, is it's maybe a tool to start to build that R, right?
That's right.
It's a construct that's easy enough to get around to start having the right conversations.
You bet. Exactly. Yes. Start by having a PowerScore conversation, and then you'll start to quickly realize, hey, look, going international is our big priority for next year, and yet the person in charge of that isn't in our weekly senior team meetings. Wow. Well, that's that's silly. Let's make sure, Amber joins these meetings because that's one of our big priorities for this upcoming year. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. I don't think I necessarily would have included getting results in part of the relationships, but that's the whole point of the business construct of the team, right? I mean, it's a team that's designed to get results. It's not just there to hang out. We've got other groups for that.
You seem like a really nice guy. You have friends for that, and you have there's social settings. You have religious groups. There's lots of reasons humans get together. In the business context, humans are getting together to achieve results that are mutually beneficial. So the closer we could stay focused around designing those relationships to stay focused on results, the better. I really like the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. Right, he's not a business person. He's a Harvard surgeon and a New Yorker writer. But he did this. He has a great book, Checklist Manifesto, where the big punchline is you can save lives, like thousands of lives a year in operating rooms, if you just simply have the right people going over the basics. We're here to amputate the left foot. I'm John and I'm the surgeon. And then like people kind of say what the mission is and what their role is. And it sounds really hokey, but it's simple disciplines like that where the right people are communicating at the right times, focusing on the result they're trying to achieve, can really make a world of difference in being successful.
Yeah, I know, and I think that was really important. Hey, Geoff, I really enjoyed our conversation. Our time's up; it just flew by.
Aw, that was fun. Thank you.
It was fun. Hopefully, I can bring you back again sometime. What do you think?
Absolutely, anytime. Hey, good luck with your book release. I just one-clicked it here, and I look forward to reading it.
That's great. Thanks so much. Look forward to hearing about it. Hey, if you liked that episode, there's a ton more like it on iTunes. Just search Paper Napkin Wisdom. Go to papernapkinwisdom.com to find the blog and pictures of all of the paper napkins. Plus, you can also follow along on Facebook, find Paper Napkin Wisdom on Twitter at WiseNapkin. My name is Geoff Smart. This is Paper Napkin Wisdom. Thanks for watching. Make it a great day.